The galaxy trembled beneath the dying chorus of 1,000 suns, their light dimming as if exhausted by the weight of centuries of war. Across the void, the remnants of the Imperium's great fleets drifted like funerary ships, their hulls scarred and their banners singed by the flames of 1,000 conquests. In the cold silence of space, a solitary war temple loomed, suspended above a shattered world whose very crust had been torn asunder by sorceries older than memory. Dust spiraled in the blackened heavens, reflecting a faint, ghostly light upon the marble of its spires. It was here, amid ruins that whispered secrets of forgotten emperors and ancient betrayals, that Sister Celestine Valeria knelt, her armor dulled by the ash of sacrifice, her gaze fixed upon the horizon where stars burned and fell in quiet mourning. Before we begin the story, know this: we truly love and care for you. Every pulse of light in this dying cosmos is reflected in the hearts of those who hear these words, and every choice the heroine makes will echo the tremors of emotion within us all. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from and what time is it there? Now let's get started. Valeria rose, her ceramite pauldrons creaking softly, and allowed her eyes to wander across the skeletal remains of the city below. The ruins told tales of both glory and despair. Temples once devoted to saints now lay in ruin, their altars desecrated as if the world itself had lost its faith. She had seen countless battles, shed oceans of blood in the Emperor's name, yet this moment felt different. The weight upon her shoulders was not merely that of the armor she bore or the foes she had vanquished. It was the weight of time itself, a burden magnified by the knowledge that some powers, though vanquished, never truly died. Somewhere in the darkness, whispers of corruption stirred, ancient voices that promised dominion, immortality, and vengeance. The first messenger arrived on silent wings. A shadowy figure draped in obsidian robes, its face obscured by a veil that seemed to drink the starlight. "The heretic lords rise again," it intoned, voice hollow, echoing across the ruined plaza. "And the chains of loyalty are frayed." Valeria's hand instinctively rested upon the hilt of her power sword, the blade humming faintly with ceramite energy. She felt a shiver travel along her spine, a cold reminder that loyalty was often the first casualty in a war waged across both hearts and stars. Memories came unbidden like shards of light through a stormed warp. She saw the day the Empire's fleets had fractured under the weight of ambition. Brothers in arms turning against one another, banners of unity sundered by greed and fear. She recalled the whispered promises of a mentor, now vanished, who had once taught her that faith and steel were inseparable. And yet, the galaxy had shifted, twisting and convulsing under the shadow of those very choices. How much of victory was owed to loyalty and how much to treachery, she asked herself. Her internal conflict deepened when she remembered the relics in the temple's inner sanctum. Artifacts of forbidden power, some rumored to grant the wielder immortality, lay encased in wards older than memory. Many would see them as salvation. She saw them as chains, tempting her with eternal life but demanding a toll measured in betrayal and soul debt. The cost of immortality was a thing she could almost feel, the slow erosion of human empathy, the quiet corrosion of trust, the endless solitude that stretched across millennia. To take up such power was to cast oneself into the abyss and invite the shadows to speak. Above her, the last light of a nearby star flared and vanished, leaving the world beneath in twilight and ash. In that instant, Valeria made a decision. She would not allow the darkness to dictate her actions, but neither could she ignore it. She would move forward guided by faith, but always aware of the whispers that would follow her, patient and relentless. And yet, even as she steeled herself, a shadow of doubt lingered. Loyalty and betrayal were not always defined by deeds. Often they were measured in silence, in moments unseen, in choices that bore consequences the heart could scarcely endure. Her steps echoed in the hollow halls as she approached the grand chapel, where mosaics of saints and martyrs reflected the fractured starlight. She ran a hand over the cold stone, feeling centuries of devotion etched into the marble. There was a time when she would have knelt without hesitation, when faith alone had sufficed to steel her heart against despair. But now, every act of devotion was tempered by suspicion. Every prayer carried the weight of potential deception. Somewhere within those walls lay the answer, or perhaps the beginning of a new question, one that would test her loyalty, her morality, and the very essence of what it meant to endure beyond the limits of flesh and time. As she ascended the steps of the altar, she sensed movement in the shadows. Figures emerged, cloaked in the pale light of the dying sun, their eyes glinting with both reverence and ambition. Among them, one figure stood apart, tall, imposing, yet familiar. "You tread a perilous path, Sister Celestine," it said, voice soft but edged with the weight of centuries. "The choices you make here will echo across worlds and perhaps across eternity itself." Valeria's heart clenched. She recognized the truth in the words and the menace beneath them. Here, in the hollow remnants of a once great world, she would be forced to confront not only the threats of the galaxy, but the shadows within her own heart. The first chapter of her journey had begun, not with the clash of blades or the roar of engines, but with a quiet reckoning. Every star that fell in the sky mirrored the fragility of empires, the fleeting nature of trust, and the relentless march of time. Somewhere far beyond the reach of her gaze, the galaxy waited, vast and indifferent. She alone bore the burden of choice, to embrace the temptation of forbidden power, to remain steadfast in her faith, or to falter and risk the corruption that licked hungrily at the edges of her soul. And so, with the ashes of a world beneath her feet and the whispering void above, Sister Celestine Valeria took her first step forward. Not as a savior, not as a conqueror, but as one who would endure, if only she could survive the betrayals to come. The stars might die, empires might crumble, and the shadows might rise eternal, yet in that instant she understood that the path ahead would demand both courage and sacrifice, a litany written in blood and devotion, sung across the void. Her journey had begun, and the galaxy, indifferent yet watchful, would remember her choices. The stars above the shattered world seemed colder now, their light refracted through drifting ash and the remnants of orbital debris. Sister Celestine Valeria moved through the corridors of the war temple with measured steps, her armor echoing faintly against stone walls etched with sigils older than any living memory. The first echoes of doubt that had crept into her mind upon the ruined plaza now festered, carried in the subtle cadence of whispers and unspoken warnings. Loyalty, she understood, was rarely given freely in times of chaos. It was a fragile construct, subject to the gravity of ambition, fear, and desire. She entered the strategy chamber, a vast domed hall where the light of dying stars filtered through fractured stained glass, casting fractured mosaics upon polished ceramite floors. Here she would meet the council of her sisters, the Sister Celestines, commanders and chaplains who had survived the initial collapse of the Empire's defensive lines. Their faces were grim, etched with fatigue and unspoken suspicion, their eyes darting like wary prey under her gaze. Among them was Sister Magdalene, once a mentor, now an enigma wrapped in ceremonial robes that shimmered with the faint aura of psychically augmented wards. "You see them," Valeria said softly, pointing toward the holographic display of the galaxy, constellations flickering like the last gasps of dying hearts. All the worlds in the Imperium, fragmented, vulnerable, teetering on the edge of annihilation. Her voice carried both authority and the tremor of unease. She could feel the scrutiny of her council, their own fears mirrored in their posture, and in the subtle twitching of fingers upon the hilts of their relic blades. Sister Magdalene stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "And yet, Sister Celestine, we are here. We endure. We fight. The enemy is not the stars nor the void, but the corruption that seeps through our own ranks." Her words were measured, but each syllable struck like a bell tolling in the darkened hall. "You must remember, power always comes with a price. Do not let ambition blind. You, or the very empire you seek to protect, will devour you." Valeria's chest tightened. She knew these words were not merely cautionary. They were a veiled accusation. Somewhere within the council lurked suspicion, doubt that her desire to act decisively could lead to ruin, that her decisions might tip the balance toward chaos rather than salvation. And yet the path forward required decisiveness. The demonic incursions were spreading, creeping through the rift worlds with a patience older than the Imperium itself. She could not hesitate. From the shadows, another presence stirred. Brother Corvin, a figure whose loyalty had been questioned many times before, yet whose cunning in battle had earned grudging respect. His eyes, sharp and calculating, followed her every motion. "The enemy knows our hesitation," he said, voice low, carrying the weight of both accusation and advice. "Every moment we delay, their corruption spreads further. Do not allow the fear of betrayal to paralyze you." Valeria considered them both, balancing the council against her instincts. The corridors of the mind, she knew, were as dangerous as the corridors of space. One misstep, one choice made in haste or fear could unravel everything. She felt the pull of the relics in the inner sanctum, hidden beneath layers of wards and prayers. Power lay there, and with it the promise of immortality. But at what cost? Her gaze lingered on the distant mosaics of saints and martyrs, their eyes seeming to judge her even now. A sudden vibration pulsed through the temple, faint but insistent. Valeria's hand went to her sword as the council tensed. Through the panoramic viewing ports, the void beyond was alive with motion. Warships, both loyalist and corrupted, maneuvering in calculated patterns that hinted at strategy, but also at something unseen. The enemy had grown bolder. They tested the defenses, probing for weakness, and in doing so reflected the uncertainty that festered within Valeria herself. Each decision carried not only tactical consequences, but moral weight. Each life she spared or condemned would ripple across worlds like a stone cast into an endless ocean. Sister Magdalene's gaze softened, a rare display of warmth in a council hardened by loss. "You feel the burden," she said. "It is the same burden I have carried. To lead is to know both the cost and the price of hesitation. The line between loyalty and betrayal is not drawn in ink or blood alone, but in the choices you make when no one watches." Her words resonated, stirring memories of the battles that had come before. Valeria recalled the Sister Celestines who had fallen, not by the sword of the enemy, but by the miscalculations of those who claimed to protect them. Betrayal, she realized, often came wrapped in the guise of duty. And yet the fire within her would not be quenched. She would act, even if the cost was the very soul of her order. A soft chime echoed through the chamber. The communications console flickered to life, projecting the visage of an allied commander from a distant sector, his armor etched with the sigils of his house. "Sister Celestine," he said urgently, "the rift world of Carthun has fallen. The demon cults have established control. Our forces are cut off and the warp storms are intensifying. We require immediate intervention. Your command is critical." Valeria's jaw tightened. Carthun was a vital strategic point, one whose loss would fracture the entire defensive line. And yet, to commit fully would mean stretching her forces thin, risking both her sisters and the civilians she had sworn to protect. The council looked to her. and in their faces she read the mirrored reflection of her own turmoil, the tension between morality and necessity, between loyalty and ambition. Her mind raced. Each choice felt both inevitable and impossible. To act decisively was to court suspicion. To hesitate was to invite ruin. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the stars, the whispers of corruption waited, patient and eternal, and yet within her heart a spark of resolve glimmered. She would lead, she decided, even if the path demanded sacrifices beyond measure. The burden of command was hers alone, and in it lay both salvation and damnation. "Prepare the fleet," she commanded, her voice steady despite the turmoil roiling beneath her breastplate. "We march to Carthun. Every sister will be ready, and remain vigilant. Trust must be earned, not assumed, and the shadows are ever hungry." Brother Corvin inclined his head, a faint acknowledgement of both respect and caution. Sister Magdalen's lips pressed together, a silent blessing and warning intertwined. Valeria turned toward the inner sanctum where the relics called to her still, a reminder that the choices of the living were inexorably entwined with the powers of the eternal. As the council dispersed, Valeria remained for a moment staring out into the fractured void. The galaxy was a living testament to ambition and betrayal, to empires built upon the bones of the faithful and the damned alike. Yet within her, a flame endured, fragile but unyielding, a testament to resolve, courage, and the perilous beauty of sacrifice. The first step of action had been taken, but the path ahead was fraught with both external menace and the treacherous terrain of the heart. Somewhere in the galaxy, corruption waited, patient and eternal. And somewhere within her, doubt lingered, a shadow alongside determination, reminding her that leadership was both a gift and a curse, and that the cost of loyalty could be higher than any battlefield demanded. The journey to Carthun would be long, the stakes monumental and the tests unrelenting. But Sister Celestine Valeria knew with the unshakable clarity of the faithful that she must endure. For to falter would not only imperil the galaxy but risk the very essence of herself. And in a universe where the stars themselves seemed to mourn, endurance was the only litany worth singing. The void between stars was not empty. It hummed with anticipation, a silent chorus of light and shadow that stretched across centuries, waiting for the actions of mortals and immortals alike to tip the scales. Sister Celestine Valeria stood upon the bridge of the command vessel Eternal Vigil, her gauntleted hands resting lightly upon the polished rail. Before her, the fleet arrayed itself like a constellation of silver and obsidian, engines humming, weapons primed, banners rippling despite the absence of wind. The distant warp storms over Carthun cast a sickly green hue across the void, painting every hull with the premonition of ruin. Her mind lingered on the Council's warnings. Loyalty and betrayal were threads woven into every choice, every maneuver, every prayer whispered into the cathedral of her heart. She had resolved to act decisively, to strike at Carthun with the full might of her command. Yet even as her resolve hardened, the shadow of doubt whispered insistently. Who among her sisters would falter first, and what price would be paid for her decision? The burden of leadership, she realized, was less about strategy and more about surviving the treachery that waited in the hearts of those closest to her. The communications console chimed softly, and a figure appeared. A sister from one of the forward assault ships, her armor smudged with the residue of battle. "Sister Celestine," she reported, voice steady but strained. "The enemy's demonic cohorts are consolidating. Warp anomalies intensify near the surface. Our preliminary scans indicate structures defying natural law, likely sustained by sorcery older than the Imperium itself. We will require your guidance." Valeria nodded, feeling the weight of the fleet's dependence pressing upon her like a physical force. "We strike with precision," she said, voice calm, carrying both the authority of command and the tremor of her private fears. "Every world we save, every life we protect is a testament to faith. Yet understand this. Corruption waits in every shadow, and even the most devout may falter when confronted with the impossible." Her eyes lingered on the viewports, the void alive with flickering lights and distant storms, as if the galaxy itself anticipated the choices she would make. She remembered Brother Corvin's warning, the cautious respect hidden behind the sharp angles of his gaze. "Trust must be earned, not assumed," he had said. The words had lodged in her mind like a shard of ice, and she wondered how many of her sisters carried the same seed of doubt. Each step she took could invite devotion or betrayal. And somewhere within the warp-tainted world of Carthun, the enemy waited, patient, eternal, and cunning beyond measure. The first engagement began silently, the fleet moving as a single organism toward the stormed world. Valeria directed operations with a calm exterior, though every decision was a knife's edge. She deployed boarding squads to breach key fortifications while the warships unleashed sustained barrages against cultist positions, their demon allies twisted and unnatural. From the bridge, she could see the chaos unfold below. Flashes of fire and lightning marking the fall of walls, and the screams of the damned carried faintly through Vox relays. Even as she commanded, doubt gnawed at her. Sister Magdalene's words returned, a reminder that power and loyalty were intertwined yet never guaranteed. "Do not let ambition blind you," she had said. Valeria questioned herself. Was she leading with faith or fear? With conviction or the desperate hope of proving herself unflawed? The line blurred in the green haze of warp storms, in the distant cries of the dying, and in the silent judgment reflected in the eyes of her sisters. A sudden alert drew her attention. One of the boarding parties had gone silent. Sensors indicated the presence of a warp rift, an anomaly that distorted time and space, mutating both matter and mind. Valeria's heart clenched as she realized the danger. The anomaly could consume the squad, or worse, turn them against their comrades. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, a lapse long enough to feel the weight of potential failure. The decision was hers alone. "Divert auxiliary shields and stabilize the approach," she commanded, her voice steel. "Prepare psychic wards. If corruption attempts to breach our lines, we will repel it. No sister falls to the shadows while I draw breath." Her words carried across the fleet a rallying cry and an edict of survival. Yet even as she spoke, she knew the shadows waited, patient and eternal, for moments of weakness, for hearts unguarded. The boarding squads emerged from the warp storm, battered but alive. Their reports painted a grim picture. Demons twisted by ancient rites, cultists sacrificing their own to feed the rift, and structures that defied comprehension, their geometry impossible, their architecture alive with malevolent intent. Valeria's mind raced through strategies, countermeasures, and prayers, seeking to reconcile the demands of faith, duty, and morality. Every act of destruction weighed heavily. Every life saved seemed balanced against a dozen lost. Then a whisper reached her, not through Vox or console, but through something older, a psychic echo carried by the warp. The voice was soft, seductive, familiar in its cadence. "You could command eternity. Why settle for fleeting duty when immortality lies within reach?" Valeria's hand trembled, not from fear of the enemy, but from the weight of temptation. She recognized the offer for what it was: power without end, yet paid for in the currency of betrayal, the sacrifice of trust and perhaps her very soul. She clenched her jaw, forcing the whisper into silence. Her mind raced, weighing duty against desire, morality against ambition. If she reached for the forbidden relics, she could turn the tide at Carthun. Yet she would risk the corruption of her spirit and the loss of those she had sworn to protect. To falter was to invite ruin, yet to yield was to court damnation. The galaxy waited for no hesitation, yet every choice seemed destined to haunt her for all eternity. The battle raged, chaos and order entwined in an intricate dance. Valeria directed each maneuver with the precision of one who had fought for centuries. Yet beneath her composure simmered the storm of doubt, trust, and fear. Every sister under her command depended on her decisions, yet she knew that the bonds of loyalty were fragile, subject to corrosion by ambition, temptation, and the endless whisper of the warp. By the time Carathun's skies were scorched with the fire of vanquished demons, Valeria understood the truth. Leadership was a litany written in choice and consequence. Victory was never absolute, morality always provisional, and loyalty both gift and burden. Somewhere in the shadows betrayal awaited, as patient and eternal as the stars themselves. And somewhere within her the spark of resolve endured, fragile yet unyielding. A reminder that even amidst ruin, courage, faith, and the willingness to endure could carve a path through darkness. The first true test had been survived. The rift world was secured, its warp-tainted energies suppressed for now, yet the cost had been high. Each loss, each scar, each whisper of doubt would remain etched into memory, shaping the decisions yet to come. Sister Celestine Valeria looked out at the void, where the stars still trembled and the galaxy waited, indifferent yet watchful. The journey ahead was long, fraught with treachery, moral peril, and the ever-looming specter of corruption. And yet, she would endure. The aftermath of Carthun's liberation left the void ringing with silence. Ships drifted in formation, their engines cooling, yet the air was heavy with unspoken tension. Sister Celestine Valeria moved through the command decks of the Eternal Vigil, each footfall a measured echo that matched the slow, deliberate pulse of her thoughts. Victory had been claimed, but triumph in the Imperium's service was always fleeting. For every demon purged, another threat waited in the shadows. For every sister spared, another might falter under pressure. The weight of command pressed upon her, relentless, and yet she could not, would not, allow hesitation to claim her soul. The council had gathered once more in the chamber of strategy, the stained glass casting fractured reflections on their faces. Each sister present bore the marks of battle, scorched armor, bloodied hands, eyes wide with memories they would carry to the grave. They were survivors, yet survival alone did not guarantee loyalty, nor did it absolve them of ambition. Valeria studied them carefully. Among the familiar faces, one stood apart, Sister Lucia, newly elevated to command after Carthun's defense. There was something in her eyes, a subtle calculation, a questioning of authority that did not yet speak in words but lingered like a shadow on the edge of conscience. "You have done well," Valeria began, her voice steady but weighted with the gravity of command. "Carthun survives, but the rift is not closed. There will be further trials, and each choice we make will be measured not only by victory but by the fidelity of our hearts." Her words hung in the chamber, each syllable a thread connecting duty, faith, and morality. She felt the council's eyes upon her, each glance carrying both trust and doubt, admiration and scrutiny. Leadership, she understood, was never a singular act. It was a covenant, fragile and easily broken. Sister Magdalene inclined her head. "Your resolve carries us, Sister Celestine, yet caution is required. Carthun's defeat is only temporary. The warp storms conceal forces beyond our comprehension, and the enemy will test both our faith and our bonds." Her voice was gentle but carried the authority of experience, a subtle reminder that even the strongest resolve was insufficient when confronted by both mortal and immortal threats. Valeria's thoughts wandered to the relics in the inner sanctum, their forbidden allure pressing upon her from the shadows. She had resisted before, yet each battle, each act of sacrifice whispered promises she could scarcely ignore. Immortality and power awaited those bold enough to claim them, but at a cost measured in trust, morality, and the soul's endurance. The weight of the decision pressed upon her, the temptation subtle yet persistent, like a shadow brushing across the edges of her mind. From the corner of the chamber, Sister Lucia stepped forward, her voice low but carrying an edge of urgency. "Sister Celestine, there are murmurs among the fleet. Some question your decisions during the Carthun engagement. They ask why you did not commit more fully, why certain squads were withheld. Loyalty is tested not only by obedience but by action." Her words were measured, precise, yet underneath lay an insinuation that stung more than any physical wound. Valeria felt the flicker of doubt stir among the council, a reminder that loyalty was rarely absolute and trust even rarer. The accusation, though indirect, could not be ignored. Valeria's hands clenched at her sides, the pulse in her temples a metronome counting both anger and calculation. "Every decision I make," she said slowly, "is to preserve life where possible and achieve victory without forsaking our oaths. Questioning action is acceptable. Questioning intent is a far heavier burden." Her gaze met Lucia's, sharp and unwavering, a silent challenge underscoring the tension between duty and suspicion. A sudden alert interrupted the standoff. Sensors indicated a warp surge emanating from the rift core beneath Carthun. The readings were erratic, unstable, hinting at a presence both ancient and malignant. Valeria's heart clenched. The demonic incursion had not ended. It had only retreated, and somewhere in the depths, a seed of corruption waited, patient and eternal. The council shifted uneasily, the air thick with anticipation and unspoken fear. Valeria's resolve hardened. "Prepare an investigative strike," she ordered. "We descend in teams, shielded by wards and guided by faith. We will uncover the source of this corruption and purge it completely." Even as the command left her lips, doubt pressed at the edges of her consciousness. Trust, loyalty, and power intertwined in a dangerous triad. To falter was to endanger not only the mission but the souls of all under her command. As the fleet prepared for descent, she lingered at the viewport, staring into the swirling green storms below. Each tendril of warp energy seemed alive, as if mocking the efforts of mortals to impose order upon chaos. Somewhere in that infernal storm, the enemy waited, and perhaps within her own ranks, betrayal waited too, patient and imperceptible. Valeria could not know which would strike first, the corruption of the warp or the corruption of the heart. Her internal conflict deepened when a whisper, faint yet unmistakable, brushed against her mind. "Why limit yourself to mortal victories? Immortality is offered freely to those willing to seize it." She recoiled, the memory of the relics vivid in her thoughts. Power beyond imagining beckoned, yet she could feel the cost in the depths of her soul. Trust shattered, morality compromised, isolation eternal. Every choice weighed as heavily as a star collapsing in the void. And she understood that the burden of command was inseparable from the burden of conscience. Descending to the surface, her squads encountered resistance almost immediately. Warp-corrupted fauna, remnants of cultist experiments, and demonic entities assaulted them, testing their resolve and their faith. Valeria moved among them with precision, her sword a blur of ceramite energy, wards flaring with every strike. Yet even in the midst of action, her mind could not quiet the questions that gnawed at her. Had she done enough? Were her sisters truly loyal, or did ambition and fear mask a deeper treachery? Each victory was shadowed by the possibility of failure, each life saved by the certainty of more dying. Hours passed like centuries, the campaign unfolding as a trial of endurance. By the time the warp surge was stabilized, the squads returned, battered but victorious. Yet the victory was hollow. The rift remained a wound in the fabric of reality, its corruption only partially contained. Sister Lucia approached Valeria, her expression inscrutable. "The mission succeeded," she said softly. "Yet, not all victories are absolute. The questions of loyalty, of trust, they remain." Valeria nodded, her gaze distant. The cost of victory weighed upon her. Faith tested, trust strained, and the relentless pull of temptation whispering ever present. She understood now that every choice she made would echo across time, leaving scars not only upon the galaxy, but upon her own soul. Loyalty and betrayal, power and sacrifice, faith and doubt, they were inseparable, each defining the litany she would continue to sing even as the stars themselves seemed to mourn. In the silence that followed, she realized the truth of command. It was a burden without end, a trial without pause, and a path where even triumph bore the bitter taste of shadow. And still she endured, for the galaxy demanded nothing less, and the litany of sacrifice must continue, eternal and unbroken. The warp storms over Carthun had calmed, leaving a lingering haze of corruption that clung to the world like a stubborn shadow. Sister Celestine Valeria stood upon the bridge of the eternal vigil, the dim green light from the rift below casting long, trembling shadows across her armor. Her thoughts churned as the fleet prepared for resupply and repair, yet there was no relief in the rhythm of engines or the bustle of her sisters. Victory, she knew, was temporary. Each triumph carved its own scars, and each decision rippled across both time and conscience. The weight of leadership was relentless, and the faintest whisper of doubt could fester into betrayal. Her mind lingered on Sister Lucia, whose cautious demeanor had shifted subtly during the aftermath of Carthun's defense. There was calculation behind every word, hesitation behind every salute. Valeria could not yet accuse her of disloyalty. Trust, after all, was a fragile gift. But the first seeds of suspicion had been sown, and she could feel them growing in the fertile soil of uncertainty. Even among the most devout, the lure of ambition and survival could twist hearts in ways subtle, yet deadly. A sudden alert drew her gaze to the fleet's tactical display. A small contingent of raiders had slipped past their sensors, moving with precision toward a nearby outpost. The ships were lightly armed, but the timing suggested intent. They were probing defenses, testing resolve, and perhaps assessing the strength of command. Valeria's mind worked quickly, weighing responses, potential casualties, and the moral consequences of a preemptive strike. Every action in the Imperium bore the weight of consequence, and in her heart, she understood that the simplest decision could unravel not just her authority, but the loyalty of her sisters. "Prepare an intercept squadron," she commanded, her voice calm, even as the pulse of tension in her chest quickened. "Move to engage, but avoid unnecessary destruction. We are the Emperor's sword, not executioners of the weak." Her words were precise, a balance of moral authority and tactical necessity. Yet even as she spoke, the whisper returned, faint and insistent. "Power, eternal and unchallenged, awaits those willing to claim it. Why linger among mortals when you could command eternity?" Valeria's hand brushed the hilt of her sword, a reflex born of years of training and battle. The relics of the inner sanctum loomed in her thoughts, their forbidden promise lingering at the edges of perception. To claim such power would ensure victory, protect her sisters, and suppress corruption. But the cost would be immeasurable: the erosion of trust, the fracturing of morality, and the isolation of immortality. Every choice bore a consequence, yet the whisper remained, patient and eternal, a reminder that temptation was as relentless as the stars themselves. The intercept squadron launched, and within minutes contact was established. The raiders proved more cunning than expected, their movements precise, suggesting guidance by forces beyond mortal comprehension. Valeria directed her sisters with a meticulous hand, each decision calculated to minimize loss while maximizing tactical advantage. The skirmish unfolded like a deadly dance across the void, flashes of ceramite and energy weapons illuminating the darkness, each strike a testament to both courage and the burden of command. Even in action, doubt gnawed at her. She could feel the eyes of Sister Lucia upon her, measuring, calculating, judging. The tension between faith and suspicion was palpable, a silent specter that threatened to unravel the cohesion of the fleet. Valeria understood that the greatest threats often came not from the enemy but from those closest to her, whose hearts and intentions were hidden behind oaths and ceremonial words. Trust, she realized, was a fragile chain, easily broken and devastating when it snapped. When the engagement ended, the raiders were neutralized, but the encounter had revealed unsettling intelligence. The enemy was more organized than previously assessed, their strategy deliberate, patient, and deeply informed. Someone, Valeria suspected, was feeding them knowledge, anticipating movements and exploiting weaknesses. The realization settled like ice in her veins. Betrayal was not merely possible, it was inevitable. And in the vast, indifferent galaxy, the cost of betrayal could extend far beyond the lives of a single fleet or the survival of a single world. Sister Magdalene approached, her expression grave yet measured. "The probes indicate a new rift forming," she said softly. "Its origin is unclear, but it resonates with an ancient malice, one that may test both faith and loyalty. The warp is patient, Sister Celestine, and it watches as mortals falter." Her words were a reminder that the galaxy's trials were as much moral as they were physical, and that the cost of indecision or misjudgment was often counted in blood. Valeria considered the implications. Every step forward carried both opportunity and peril. The fleet's strength could secure the rift, but only if unity endured. Distrust could unravel them, and she knew that the whispers of ambition and the lure of forbidden power could turn allies into enemies without warning. Leadership, she realized, demanded not only strategy but insight into the human, or in this case, superhuman, heart. Each sister's loyalty was a variable, each choice a potential vector for disaster. The decision weighed heavily upon her as she descended into the medbay to check on returning squads. The wounded lay silent, their breath shallow, their eyes haunted by both physical and psychic scars. Valeria moved among them, offering prayers, blessings, and quiet words of encouragement. Each touch was a reminder of the stakes. Every life mattered, yet she could not save all. Compassion and duty intertwined in a delicate balance, and in her chest, the heart of a leader throbbed with the weight of impossible choices. A sudden vibration shook the medbay, subtle yet unmistakable. Valeria's instincts flared, a warning, an omen, perhaps both. The warp surge beneath Carthun pulsed once more, and she knew that the rift was not contained. Somewhere below, the corruption lingered, patient, eternal, and relentless. And somewhere among her sisters, the seeds of ambition and doubt had taken root, waiting for a moment of weakness to bloom into betrayal. She paused, closing her eyes, letting the silence press against her like the void itself. The galaxy was vast and indifferent, yet she carried within her the burden of responsibility, the fragile spark of faith, and the eternal question of choice. Every action had consequence. Every decision was measured not only in victory but in morality, loyalty, and the cost to the soul. To lead was to endure, and to endure was to confront both the external and internal shadows that threatened to undo all she had fought to preserve. Rising, Valeria returned to the bridge, her gaze scanning the fleet, the void, and the distant shimmering rift below. The whisper returned one final time, soft yet insistent. Eternity awaits. Will you seize it or remain bound by the chains of morality? She did not answer, for she knew the path forward demanded more than a single decision. It demanded endurance, courage, and the willingness to confront betrayal both in the enemy and within her own ranks. The journey was far from over. The rift waited, the shadows watched, and the hearts of her sisters were untested. And yet Sister Celestine Valeria stood resolute, the litany of sacrifice and faith singing silently in her soul. A guide through darkness, through betrayal, and through the storm of moral and cosmic peril that stretched endlessly before her. The void hung silent, almost contemplative, as the eternal vigil drifted above Carthun. The warp storms below had subsided into a turbulent murmur, a reminder that the corruption was patient, eternal, and cunning. Sister Celestine Valeria moved through the corridors of her vessel, the polished ceramite reflecting dim lights that flickered like dying stars. The victory at Carthun had been hard won, yet the silence after battle carried an unsettling weight, a mixture of triumph, exhaustion, and the subtle pulse of doubt that lingered like an uninvited specter. Her mind traced the events of the past days. Every strike, every choice, every act of mercy or judgment had been a test, a crucible in which both her leadership and her soul had been refined. And yet she could not ignore the undercurrent of suspicion she sensed among her sisters. Trust, she realized, was the most fragile of constructs, easily fractured by fear, ambition, or whispered temptation. Even the smallest hesitation could turn an ally into a threat, and Valeria understood that the first seeds of betrayal often germinated silently, unseen until fully grown. Sister Lucia had grown more cautious, more deliberate in her actions. Every gesture, every word carried a weight beyond the immediate task. Valeria sensed calculation in her scrutiny, a hidden agenda not yet revealed. There was no overt treachery, not yet, but the subtleties of ambition were rarely loud. They hid in glances, in silences, in decisions that seemed prudent until the consequences revealed their true cost. Valeria's hand brushed the hilt of her blade reflexively, a reminder that vigilance was eternal. The communications console chimed, drawing her attention. The image of an allied commander appeared, his face etched with concern and weariness. Sister Celestine, reports from the outer sectors indicate that multiple colonies have succumbed to demon incursions. The enemy's reach is greater than anticipated. They strike not only with force but with strategy, anticipating our moves. His voice trembled slightly, betraying both fear and exhaustion. We require your guidance. Morale is faltering and whispers of dissent are spreading. Valeria's gaze swept across the holographic display of the galaxy. Worlds were aflame, rifts pulsing like festering wounds, fleets scattered and struggling. And yet she felt the familiar tug of the relics in the inner sanctum, whispering promises of power and immortality. The temptation was subtle, almost seductive, offering a path to control the chaos with certainty. But at what cost? Every gain exacted a toll on loyalty, morality, and the soul itself. The galaxy demanded action, but the heart demanded restraint, and the two were rarely aligned. She called a council meeting. The chamber of strategy was quiet, the air thick with the unspoken tension of those who had survived the first wave of conflict. Sister Magdalen's eyes, ever watchful, lingered on Valeria, reading not only command, but the internal struggle hidden beneath her calm exterior. The rifts are growing, she said softly, and the enemy learns. Each encounter teaches them, and each victory we claim is tempered by their cunning. Trust must be tested, but loyalty must also endure. Sister Lucia remained near the edge of the chamber, her posture rigid, eyes calculating. Valeria felt the subtle friction of their mutual awareness, a silent acknowledgement that both knew the unspoken truths. Leadership carried moral weight, and decisions were rarely without consequence. "We face choices," Valeria said, her voice low but carrying the authority of command. "Every strike, every act of mercy, every restraint, it carries consequence. We must act decisively, yet with faith intact, for faith is the shield that guards against despair and corruption alike." A sudden alert shattered the stillness. Sensors indicated a fluctuation in the rift below, a spike of warp energy far greater than previously observed. The reading suggested that a demonic entity of ancient power had emerged, shaping the corruption with intent and intelligence. Valeria's chest tightened. The battle was no longer merely tactical. It was moral, psychological, and spiritual. She could lead her sisters into combat, but she could not shield them from the weight of choice, from the knowledge that every decision carried eternal echoes. The squads deployed once more, moving into the frayed edges of the rift. Valeria observed from the bridge, issuing commands with precision, yet the whisper persisted, threading through her mind like a shadow among the stars. "Seize control. Command eternity. Let nothing stand in your path." The voice was not cruel or demanding, merely patient, offering a path to certainty in a universe defined by uncertainty. She clenched her jaw, rejecting the lure of absolute power even as the weight of the galaxy pressed upon her. The conflict below was brutal and unforgiving. Warp-corrupted creatures assailed the squads, cultists fought with fanaticism, and the very fabric of reality quivered under the pressure of demonic influence. Valeria's sisters moved with disciplined precision, their faith guiding every strike, yet the strain of survival etched into their faces. Every victory came at a cost, every act of mercy shadowed by loss. And all the while, Valeria sensed the unspoken calculation of Sister Lucia, the quiet tension that suggested ambition and fear were ever present, like coiled serpents waiting for a misstep. Hours passed. The entity within the rift revealed itself at last, a towering, amorphous form, its presence both alien and eternal. It radiated malevolence, yet its movements were deliberate, strategic, almost sentient. Valeria understood immediately. The battle was not simply against a demon, but against a force capable of probing hearts and minds, of turning loyalty into doubt, courage into fear. Every decision she made was mirrored in the chaos below, every hesitation magnified into consequence. Finally, the rift stabilized, the entity suppressed temporarily, though not destroyed. The squads returned, wounded yet alive. The council assembled once more, eyes weary, voices subdued. The unspoken truths lingered. Victories were incomplete. Corruption was eternal, and within the ranks of the faithful, seeds of doubt and ambition had been sown. Valeria regarded her sisters, understanding that the trials were only beginning, that trust must be earned anew with each choice, and that the shadows of betrayal were patient, eternal, and inevitable. In the quiet aftermath, Valeria stood alone upon the bridge, gazing into the void. The stars themselves seemed to mourn, distant and indifferent witnesses to the endless struggle. She felt the weight of command, the pressure of morality, and the persistent whisper of temptation. Loyalty was fragile, betrayal inevitable, and every act of faith carried the duality of salvation and ruin. And yet, she endured, for the litany of sacrifice was eternal, and the galaxy demanded no less. The void above Carthun had grown colder, as if the stars themselves recoiled from the corruption festering below. Sister Celestine Valeria stood upon the observation deck, her silhouette framed against the distant flashes of warp-lit storms. The rift had not healed, nor had the victories of her sisters silenced the whisper of doubt that lingered like smoke in her mind. Every world, every fleet, every act of faith was tested, yet the greatest trial had begun to stir within the ranks of her own command. Betrayal, subtle and insidious, slithered through hearts that had sworn allegiance, and Valeria sensed its presence as keenly as the pulse of warp energy beneath her feet. Reports arrived in rapid succession, an allied convoy intercepted, worlds on the fringe of the Imperium overrun, and scouts returning with fragmented accounts of cultist maneuvers. Valeria's eyes narrowed. The enemy's strategy was no longer a simple assault. It was a deliberate probe, exploiting weaknesses, testing loyalties, and striking where her control was most tenuous. She knew then that the trials ahead were both external and internal, that the shadow of betrayal could cost more than a single fleet or a single world. "Prepare the assault teams," she commanded, her voice a calm instrument of authority that belied the storm within. "We move at first light, shields at maximum, wards deployed. Each sister must understand that failure is not an option. Not for them, not for the Imperium, not for the souls entrusted to our care." Her words carried weight, yet she could feel eyes upon her, measuring, calculating, questioning. Among them, Sister Lucia's gaze lingered, and Valeria knew that the seeds of ambition and doubt had grown beneath a veneer of obedience. The descent to Carthun was swift, the fleet slicing through space like a silver blade. Below, the rift churned, tendrils of corruption writhing as though alive, probing, anticipating. Valeria's squads deployed across fractured cities and shattered landscapes, wards flaring against the mutating energies. Every engagement demanded both precision and moral clarity, for the demonic forces exploited hesitation, doubt, and fear. Yet even as her sisters fought with devotion, Valeria sensed the undercurrent of calculation within her own ranks, subtle manipulations, questions of timing, and the unspoken possibility that some hearts were no longer entirely loyal. Sister Magdalene approached her briefly, her expression solemn. "The enemy grows cunning," she said, "and the hearts of mortals, and even the faithful, are fragile under strain. Be vigilant, Sister Celestine. Temptation waits as patiently as the warp itself." Her words struck like a bell resonating through Valeria's mind. Leadership was never merely strategy, it was insight into the human and superhuman heart. Every act, every choice, every hesitation could become a weapon in unseen hands. The first major engagement erupted in the ruins of a cathedral scarred by warp fire. Cultists had entrenched themselves within its hollowed halls, demonic forms interlaced with the stones themselves pulsating with unholy life. Valeria led the vanguard, her ceramite gleaming in the sickly green light, every movement deliberate, every strike precise. Her sisters followed, their faith guiding their blades, yet beneath the surface tensions simmered. Orders were questioned in whispers, movements measured not only against the enemy but against the possibility of sabotage, subtle misdirection, or the erosion of trust. Hours passed, each moment a trial of endurance, faith, and discernment. Valeria confronted the demonic entity at the cathedral's core, a towering, malformed thing, intelligence and malice intertwined, radiating corruption like a fever. The clash was brutal, testing both physical skill and psychic resilience. Her wards flared, her sister's faith illuminated the darkness, yet every movement felt mirrored by the potential betrayal of those whose hearts she had once trusted without question. Amidst the battle, a subtle anomaly appeared. Sister Lucia hesitated, a fraction of a second longer than protocol allowed, redirecting a squad's focus away from a critical strike. Valeria felt the instinctive chill of recognition. It was not error or fatigue. It was deliberate, calculated, a choice made in silence and secrecy. Her mind raced, balancing the immediate need to continue the fight with the dawning realization that betrayal had begun, not with words, but with a single silent act. Valeria's voice rang out, commanding, urgent, "Focus! Do not falter! Every life depends on faith and unity." Her blade struck true, her wards held firm, yet the image of subtle betrayal burned in her mind. Even in victory, there was the knowledge that her command was no longer absolute. Trust had been fractured, a seed of doubt planted where loyalty should have thrived. She understood with a cold certainty that the trials were far from over, that the whispers in her mind of power, of immortality, of absolute control were only one facet of the challenge. The other, darker facet lay in the hearts of those closest to her. When the entity was subdued and the rift partially stabilized, the aftermath revealed the extent of the betrayal's shadow. Supplies had been misallocated, reinforcements delayed, and squads exposed unnecessarily. No direct evidence of treachery had emerged, yet Valeria's instincts, honed by centuries of battle and faith, screamed of subtle sabotage. The moral weight of command had shifted. She was not only a shield against corruption without, but also a guardian against corruption within. Every decision carried twice the burden. Every action was measured against both external and internal threats. In the quiet that followed, Valeria addressed her sisters. "We have prevailed," she said, voice carrying both relief and admonition. "Yet the war is not over. Corruption lingers, patience endures, and trust must be renewed continually. Each sister carries the burden of faith, duty, and vigilance, not only against the enemy, but against the shadows that dwell in hearts." Her eyes swept across the room, lingering on Sister Lucia, unspoken words heavy between them. The seeds of betrayal had been identified, but the time to confront them had not yet come. Timing, she knew, was as crucial as courage. As she returned to the observation deck, Valeria gazed upon Carthun, its fractured cities glowing faintly in the light of distant suns. The rift pulsed below, a reminder that corruption was eternal, cunning, and patient. Her thoughts drifted to the whispers of forbidden power, the promises of control and immortality, and the subtle fractures within her own ranks. The litany of sacrifice, faith, and vigilance must continue, for the galaxy demanded no less, and betrayal, patient and eternal, awaited those who faltered even for a moment. Valeria's hand rested on the polished rail. The journey ahead would test not only her skill in battle, but her wisdom, her moral resolve, and her ability to navigate the fragile threads of trust woven among her sisters. The storm of conflict, both external and internal, had only begun, and the shadows in both the warp and the heart of the faithful promised trials that would echo across the stars for centuries to come. And yet she endured, for leadership demanded resilience, and the Imperium's litany of sacrifice could never be silenced, even in the face of betrayal and darkness. The aftermath of the battle left Carthun smoldering, its cities shattered and scarred, yet alive with the faint pulse of warp energy. Sister Celestine Valeria moved through the corridors of the eternal vigil. The hum of the engines beneath her feet a reminder that even in victory, time did not pause. Every victory brought its own shadows, and she felt them creeping along the edges of her command, subtle, relentless, and patient. Each glance from her sisters now carried unspoken questions. Each measured silence hinted at thoughts not yet voiced. Trust, she realized, had begun to fracture, and suspicion could spread like wildfire through even the most devout ranks. Sister Lucia's presence was ever more pronounced, her movements precise, her glances calculated. She offered counsel when asked, but her words often lingered with double meanings, suggestions of caution that were meant, Valeria suspected, to influence decisions subtly. The betrayal she had sensed in the previous battle had not vanished. It had only hidden behind the veneer of obedience. Valeria understood that leadership now demanded more than command in battle. It required foresight, discernment, and the courage to confront shadows within as much as enemies without. Reports arrived in rapid succession. Multiple worlds along the Imperium's frontier had been assaulted simultaneously, coordinated strikes suggesting intelligence beyond mortal comprehension. Warp anomalies flared unpredictably, and scouts returned with tales of cultists wielding both technology and warp magic in concert. The enemy had evolved, adapting to their strategies, anticipating their maneuvers. Every action Valeria considered was measured against two dangers: the corruption of the warp below and the potential for treachery among those she relied upon. She convened the council in the Chamber of Strategy. Her sisters assembled with measured discipline, each bearing the marks of battle and the shadows of doubt. Sister Magdalen's eyes were heavy with concern. The enemy's tactics are deliberate, their strikes precise, and among us the subtle disturbances, the misalignments of squads, the hesitation in command, indicate the possibility of disloyalty. Faith alone cannot shield us, vigilance must accompany it. Her words carried the weight of experience, the quiet reminder that morality and loyalty were tested in ways that could not be measured solely by victories on the battlefield. Sister Lucia stepped forward, her posture rigid, eyes unwavering. "We must not underestimate the enemy," she said, voice calm yet edged with intent. "Every decision, every deployment, every strike must be calculated, and yet, even in caution, we must recognize the limits of our perception. There are forces at work beyond our comprehension." Valeria noted the subtle implication. Caution was necessary, but hesitation could be weaponized. Her intuition screamed that these words were not merely counsel, but an assertion of influence, an attempt to shape thought and action in silence. A sudden alert interrupted the council. A warp flare erupted from the rift below Carthun, massive in scale, shaking the very structure of the planet. Sensors indicated an ancient entity rising from the depths, one whose presence radiated intelligence and malevolence, a force that had waited patiently for centuries. Valeria's pulse quickened, her mind racing through strategy, contingency, and moral consequence. This battle was no longer merely tactical. It was existential, testing faith, courage, and the bonds of loyalty that held her sisters together. The squads deployed immediately, descending into fractured streets and ruins, wards flaring against the oppressive energies. Every encounter was deadly, every strike a test of precision and moral resolve. The entity itself moved with cunning, anticipating attacks, exploiting hesitation, and probing the hearts of the faithful. Valeria's mind wrestled with strategy while her instincts remained alert to subtle anomalies, misplaced squads, delays, even minor errors, all of which hinted at the presence of betrayal among those she had trusted. Hours stretched like centuries. The entity revealed itself in full, an enormous, ever-shifting form, composed of tendrils of shadow and fire, its gaze intelligent and calculating. It did not strike indiscriminately. Instead, it probed, seeking weaknesses, observing patterns, exploiting the smallest fractures in morale. Valeria confronted it directly, her blade igniting with holy flame, her wards bristling with psychic energy. Her sisters followed, their faith illuminating the darkness, yet even as they fought, Valeria sensed the undercurrent of subtle treachery within their ranks. In a critical moment, a squad under Sister Lucia's indirect supervision faltered, retreating from a key position for no tactical reason. Valeria's instincts flared. The hesitation was deliberate, not overt betrayal, not yet, but a calculated act of disruption. Her gaze met Lucia's across the battlefield, and in that fleeting moment the truth was undeniable. The seeds of ambition and disloyalty had grown, silent and patient, waiting for opportunity to bloom. Every success in battle now carried the shadow of uncertainty, every victory potentially hollowed by the choices of those closest to her. The entity was finally subdued, the rift partially stabilized, yet the victory was tempered by the awareness of internal threat. Supplies had been misallocated, reinforcements delayed, and minor acts of sabotage had gone undetected until now. Valeria's heart was heavy with the weight of command. Leadership demanded not only skill in strategy and faith in the Emperor, but insight into the fragile and sometimes treacherous hearts of those she relied upon. Every act of loyalty, every measure of trust had to be reevaluated in light of subtle betrayal. In the aftermath, Valeria gathered her sisters on the observation deck, their faces worn, eyes heavy with fatigue and unease. "We have survived, but the trials are far from over," she said, her voice low and measured. "The enemy is patient, corruption eternal, and trust within our ranks must be earned continually. Every act of faith, every decision, every sacrifice carries consequence, both on the battlefield and in our hearts." Her gaze lingered on Sister Lucia, silent and deliberate, a promise that the time for judgment would come, and that loyalty must prove itself in both action and intent. The stars above seemed indifferent, distant witnesses to a struggle that was at once external and internal, cosmic and personal. Valeria understood the truth of command, that the greatest threats were often unseen, residing in shadowed intentions, patient calculation, and ambition disguised as caution. To lead was to endure, to observe and to confront both the darkness without and the darkness within. And so she stood steadfast, knowing that the litany of sacrifice and vigilance must continue, for the galaxy demanded it, and betrayal, patient and eternal, waited for the moment to strike. Carthun's skies burned with dying light, streaks of crimson and green marking the remnants of warp storms that had raged unchecked for hours. Sister Celestine Valeria stood upon the observation deck of the eternal vigil, the hum of the ship's engines beneath her feet a dull rhythm against the storm that battered her mind. Victory was fleeting, and the victories of the past had left scars that were neither visible nor easily healed. Her sisters moved around her, each bearing the marks of battle and the weight of decisions that had tested both faith and morality. Reports arrived in rapid succession. Minor settlements on the outskirts had been overrun, supplies diverted, and reinforcements delayed. It was subtle, yet undeniable, small acts of misdirection, hesitation, or failure to act that hinted at betrayal within the ranks. Valeria's gaze fell upon Sister Lucia, whose calm demeanor now carried a sharper edge, a quiet precision that had begun to feel like a challenge rather than counsel. Trust was fragile, she realized, easily fractured by ambition or fear, and the faintest misstep could unravel everything she had fought to preserve. "Prepare the strike teams," Valeria commanded, her voice measured, calm, yet carrying the weight of authority. "We move at first light. Each sister must understand the consequences of inaction and the vigilance required in every decision. We fight not only the enemy, but the shadows that linger in hearts." Her eyes scanned the assembled sisters, lingering on those whose loyalty was unquestioned, then on those whose intent now bore the faintest trace of doubt. Leadership demanded this scrutiny, the ability to measure not only skill and faith, but character under the most extreme strain. Sister Magdalene stepped forward, her expression solemn, her voice low. "The warp's influence grows stronger," she warned. "The entity beneath Carthun is patient, intelligent, and cunning. It observes, learns, and manipulates. And within our ranks, subtle fractures threaten cohesion. Trust must be continuously reaffirmed, or the consequences will be catastrophic." Her words resonated with the weight of experience. Valeria felt the pulse of the galaxy itself in her chest, a reminder that leadership was never merely about tactics or bravery, but insight, discernment, and endurance. The strike teams launched, descending into the ruined city beneath the rift. Wards flared against the tendrils of warp corruption, illuminating streets scarred by centuries of neglect and conflict. Every movement was deliberate, every action measured, yet Valeria could feel the tension in her squads, the hesitation that whispered of misaligned intentions. Her instincts, honed through countless battles, warned that betrayal had taken root, subtle but potent, capable of turning victory into disaster with a single act of inattention or misdirection. The entity beneath the rift had grown more active, its presence a dark pulse in the warp, probing the faith, courage, and loyalty of every sister. Valeria confronted it directly, her blade ignited with holy flame, her wards bristling with psychic energy. Her sisters followed with unwavering precision, yet the unspoken tension in the air was undeniable. Even in the midst of coordinated assault, subtle acts of hesitation, misdirection, or delayed response betrayed the silent presence of ambition and doubt. Sister Lucia's squad faltered in a critical moment, retreating when a decisive strike was necessary. Valeria's instincts flared. This was no accident. The entity struck back with terrifying intelligence, exploiting the fractured cohesion among her squads. Tendrils of warp energy whipped through the ruins, tearing structures and threatening lives. Valeria moved like a storm among her sisters, guiding, protecting, correcting. Yet each correction carried an unspoken acknowledgement of the betrayal she had sensed. The moral weight of command pressed upon her heavily. Every decision measured not only in victory or loss, but in the maintenance of loyalty, trust, and the spiritual integrity of her command. Hours passed as a relentless battle unfolded across the ruins. Every engagement tested faith, courage, and perception, yet Valeria's mind could not quiet the awareness of subtle sabotage. Supplies were misdirected, reinforcements delayed, and minor tactical errors compounded into near disasters. The knowledge that betrayal lingered among the faithful was a shadow heavier than any demon, a weight that threatened to crush morale even in the midst of victory. She understood that her greatest challenge was not the entity below or the warp's influence, but the fragile bonds of trust within her command. Finally, the entity was subdued temporarily, its form retreating into the deepest shadows of the rift. The rift itself stabilized, though not healed, leaving a lingering corruption that would require constant vigilance. Valeria's sisters regrouped, exhaustion etched into their faces, yet their eyes betrayed an awareness of the internal fractures she could not ignore. The subtle acts of betrayal had been identified, but proof remained elusive. Patience, Valeria knew, was essential. The moment to confront treachery must be precise, measured, and decisive. As the squads returned, Valeria addressed her sisters, her voice both stern and reflective. "We have prevailed today, yet the war is far from over. Corruption remains, both in the warp and in hearts. Trust must be tested continually, and loyalty must prove itself through action, not words. Every act of faith, every decision, every sacrifice carries weight. The galaxy watches and the shadows wait. Be vigilant and remember the cost of faltering." Her gaze lingered on Sister Lucia, silent and unyielding, a warning unspoken yet understood. The observation deck was quiet after the council dispersed. Valeria stood alone, her mind heavy with the burden of command. The rift pulsed faintly below, a reminder of patience, cunning, and corruption eternal. She felt the whispers of forbidden power pressing at the edges of her consciousness, promises of control and immortality. Yet the shadow of betrayal among her sisters weighed more heavily. Loyalty and treachery intertwined in a dangerous dance, and leadership demanded endurance, courage, and the wisdom to navigate both. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the silence press against her like the void itself. Every victory carried scars, every choice bore consequence, and every act of faith was shadowed by doubt. Yet she endured, for the litany of sacrifice, vigilance, and courage demanded it. The galaxy was indifferent, the warp eternal and betrayal patient. And in that truth, Valeria's resolve hardened. She would confront both the corruption of the warp and the corruption in hearts, no matter the cost. For the survival of Carthun, her sisters, and the Imperium itself rested upon her vigilance. The fires of Carthun burned long into the void, the remnants of warp storms casting flickering shadows over fractured cities and shattered spires. Sister Celestine Valeria stood at the helm of the eternal vigil. The hum of the engines beneath her feet a distant rhythm against the storm in her mind. The battlefield had been won, but the victory felt hollow, marred by subtle disruptions, miscalculations, and the persistent echo of betrayal that clung to her sisters like a second skin. Leadership was no longer a matter of command alone. It had become a test of discernment, courage, and moral endurance. Reports streamed in from the outer sectors, skirmishes, ambushes, and sudden outbreaks of demonic activity. Supplies had been rerouted inexplicably, reinforcements delayed, and squads assigned to strategic points had faltered without clear cause. Valeria's eyes narrowed as she studied the patterns, her intuition, sharpened by centuries of experience, identifying the faint traces of deliberate manipulation. Someone within her ranks had begun to act with intent beyond obedience. The subtlety was masterful, a whisper of ambition cloaked in piety, and the consequences of inattention could be catastrophic. Sister Lucia's position among the council was now more pronounced, her calm, measured advice influencing decisions at every turn. Valeria felt the weight of suspicion pressing on her chest. Every suggestion of caution, every strategic calculation carried an undertone she could not ignore. Ambition had found a voice behind a mask of devotion, and the tension in the chamber was almost tangible, a silent contest of loyalty and intent. Valeria's faith in her sisters was tested not by outward assault, but by the quiet calculations of hearts that could turn on a moment's notice. The council convened, the chamber thick with unease. "The warp fluctuations are increasing," Sister Magdalene warned, her tone grave. "The entity below Carthun is adapting. It observes, it learns, and it probes not only the battlefield, but our hearts. The timing of attacks, the misallocation of resources, and subtle hesitations suggest influence beyond the mortal realm, and perhaps influence within." Her words struck a chord, resonating with Valeria's own instincts. Trust was fragile, and loyalty was proving itself under fire, yet one misstep could unmake all they had fought to preserve. Valeria's gaze swept across the council. "We move at first light. Strike teams will deploy to suppress rifts and secure vulnerable sectors. Every sister must understand the dual threats, the corruption without and the corruption within. Faith and vigilance are inseparable. No hesitation, no deviation. We endure, we prevail, and we protect the Imperium, but we do so with awareness, for betrayal waits patiently in silence." Her eyes lingered on Sister Lucia, unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. The confrontation was approaching, yet timing and precision were paramount. The squads deployed to the surface, descending into the ruined cities and fractured landscapes that had borne the brunt of the warp's corruption. Wards flared against the tendrils of warp energy, illuminating streets and temples twisted beyond recognition. Every action was precise, every strike deliberate, yet even amid the chaos, Valeria could perceive the subtle fractures. Delays in movement, slight misalignments in formations, errors in judgment that were too consistent to be mere fatigue or chance. The betrayal she had sensed was no longer subtle. It had begun to assert itself. Hours passed in relentless combat. Demonic entities summoned and sustained by the rift, struck with cunning intelligence, exploiting hesitation, probing weaknesses and observing patterns among the faithful. Valeria moved among her sisters, directing, shielding, correcting, her own blade a beacon of holy light amidst darkness. Every victory was measured, every ward maintained, every strike calculated. Yet the specter of disloyalty was ever present, its weight heavier than any physical threat. The moral and psychological burden of command pressed upon her like a warp storm pressing against reality itself. In a decisive moment, Sister Lucia's squad faltered at a critical juncture, withdrawing from an exposed position despite direct orders. The hesitation allowed the entity a fleeting advantage, almost turning a tactical victory into disaster. Valeria's instincts flared. This was deliberate. Not open betrayal, not yet, but subtle, calculated disruption. Her gaze met Lucia's across the battlefield, a silent acknowledgement of the fracture that had been growing in silence and patience. Leadership demanded action, but also discernment. Timing would be as crucial as courage in addressing the betrayal. The entity's form pulsed with intelligence, its dark mass shifting and writhing, responding to the subtle fractures among the faithful. Tendrils of warp energy lashed through the streets, demolishing structures, scattering squads, and testing both faith and discipline. Valeria's wards held firm, her sword ignited in holy flame, but she felt the weight of unseen influence pressing against every decision. The battlefield was no longer simply a test of strategy or strength. It was a trial of loyalty, morality, and endurance. Finally, after hours of relentless engagement, the entity withdrew, retreating into the depths of the rift. The wards stabilized and the squads regrouped, exhausted but alive. Supplies and reinforcements arrived, but the awareness of betrayal lingered, a shadow over every victory. Valeria understood that patience was necessary. Confrontation must be precise, and timing could not be rushed. Loyalty required proof. Subtle acts of disobedience could not be ignored. Yet the moment for judgment had to be chosen with care. She addressed her sisters, her voice carrying authority tempered with reflection. We have prevailed, yet the trials are far from complete. Corruption lingers both in the warp and in hearts. Trust must be continuously reaffirmed. Every act of faith, every choice, every sacrifice carries consequence. Be vigilant, for betrayal waits patiently, and the cost of faltering is beyond measure. Her gaze lingered on Sister Lucia, silent and deliberate, signaling that the reckoning was imminent, yet still restrained by necessity. As night fell over Carthun, Valeria stood alone on the observation deck, her eyes on the faintly glowing rift below. The whisper of forbidden power lingered at the edges of her consciousness, yet the true danger remained human. Ambition cloaked in loyalty, hesitation masked as prudence, and betrayal patient as the stars themselves. Leadership demanded endurance, courage, and the wisdom to navigate not only external threats but the fragile, often treacherous hearts of those she relied upon. And so she endured, the litany of vigilance and sacrifice her shield against darkness eternal. Carthun's skies were a sickly hue of crimson and green, the remnants of warp storms casting jagged shadows across shattered spires and ruins. Sister Celestine Valeria walked through the corridors of the eternal vigil, each footstep echoing in the silence that had settled after the latest confrontation. Victory had been hard won, but the triumph felt hollow, etched with the weight of subtle betrayal and the persistent pulse of doubt that coursed like a shadow through her sister's ranks. Every movement, every glance seemed measured, calculated, as if loyalty itself was under scrutiny. Reports from the surface arrived with growing urgency. Minor outposts were abandoned, reinforcements delayed, and strategic positions that had once held were now under threat. The subtle signs of treachery, slight miscalculations, hesitations, or deviations from protocol were becoming more pronounced. Valeria's intuition, honed over centuries of command and faith, recognized these patterns immediately. There was no mistake here. The disruption was deliberate, its intent hidden beneath a veneer of obedience and caution. She convened the council once more, the chamber thick with tension. Sister Magdalen's gaze was heavy, her voice low and grave. The warp surges beneath Carthun grow stronger, and the entity's intelligence is adaptive. But our attention must also turn inward. Patterns of hesitation, errors, and misaligned squads suggest influence not only from without but from within. Loyalty cannot be assumed even among the faithful. Her words, careful and precise, resonated with the unease Valeria had been feeling. Trust, once taken for granted, had become a fragile thread. Sister Lucia's presence at the council was marked, her calm, deliberate counsel steering strategic choices with subtle influence. Each suggestion carried weight, yet beneath the surface was a precision that did not escape Valeria's notice. Ambition, wrapped in the guise of prudence, had begun to take shape. The tension between guidance and manipulation was imperceptible to all but those attuned to the intricate dance of loyalty and deceit. Valeria felt the burden of discernment settle like a weight upon her shoulders. Leadership demanded not only faith and skill but insight into the hearts of those she relied upon. A sudden alert shattered the chamber's tense quiet. A warp flare erupted beneath the city, massive and violent, shaking the ruins and the fragile morale of the sisters. The entity beneath the rift had shifted, moving with intelligence and purpose, probing weaknesses in both strategy and faith. Valeria's pulse quickened, not from fear but from the stark awareness that the trial was no longer merely tactical. It was moral and psychological. Testing the cohesion of her command, the faith of her sisters, and her own judgment under pressure. Strike teams deployed immediately, descending into fractured streets and scarred temples. Wards flared against the insidious corruption, casting light upon twisted architecture and demonic forms that moved with both malevolence and intelligence. Each engagement demanded precision, courage, and discernment. Even as Valeria moved among her sisters, directing and correcting, the subtle fractures persisted. Delays, misaligned formations, and errors that could no longer be attributed to fatigue alone. The betrayal she had sensed was asserting itself, patient and deliberate, shaping outcomes in silence. Hours stretched as relentless combat unfolded. Tendrils of warp energy lashed through the streets, the demonic entity exploiting every hesitation, probing weaknesses and observing patterns. Valeria's wards flared with holy energy, her sword cutting through the corruption with disciplined precision, yet the psychological weight of betrayal pressed upon her. Every act of courage or faith was now shadowed by the knowledge that loyalty could fracture at the faintest provocation, that ambition might steer actions in ways that could undo victories in an instant. In a pivotal moment, Sister Lucia's squad faltered at a critical juncture, retreating from a position crucial to maintaining the integrity of the defensive line. Valeria's instincts flared. This was not hesitation born of fatigue or fear, but a calculated act. The betrayal she had sensed for days now revealed itself in subtle, deadly clarity. Every misstep, every delay, every quiet manipulation was a thread in a web that could unravel the cohesion of her forces. Her gaze met Lucia's across the battlefield, silent and piercing, acknowledging the fracture yet holding judgment in reserve. Timing, Valeria knew, would be everything in confronting this treachery. The entity struck back with renewed fury, its form a writhing, intelligent mass of shadow and fire, exploiting the fractures within the faithful. Wards flared and beams of holy light cut through the darkness, yet the battle became as much about discerning loyalty as destroying the enemy. Valeria understood that every command, every strategic decision, carried a dual weight: the external consequences of success or failure, and the internal consequences of exposing or ignoring betrayal. The battlefield had become a crucible for both faith and moral clarity, After hours of relentless conflict, the entity was subdued, retreating into the depths of the rift. The wards stabilized, the squads regrouped, and Carthun's ruins fell silent under the faint glow of distant stars. Yet the victory was incomplete. Subtle acts of sabotage had compromised resources, endangered squads, and revealed the presence of ambition cloaked in loyalty. Valeria's mind weighed patience against necessity. Confrontation was inevitable, but the timing had to be precise. Loyalty could be reclaimed or betrayal punished. But mistakes would be fatal. In the council chamber afterward, Valeria's voice was calm yet unyielding. "We have endured, yet the war is far from over. Corruption remains in the warp and in hearts. Trust must be proven through action, not words. Every decision, every act of faith, every sacrifice carries consequence. Be vigilant. The shadow of betrayal waits patiently, and the cost of faltering is greater than any blade we face on the battlefield." Her gaze lingered on Sister Lucia, silent and deliberate, signaling the reckoning that would come, but restrained by strategy, patience, and precision. As night fell over the shattered city, Valeria stood alone on the observation deck, gazing at the faint glow of the rift below. The whispers of forbidden power tugged at the edges of her consciousness, promises of control, influence, and even immortality. Yet the true threat lay not in temptation but in human hearts. Leadership demanded endurance, courage, discernment, and moral clarity. Every victory bore scars, every choice carried weight, and every act of faith was shadowed by the patient, inevitable presence of betrayal. And still, Valeria endured. The litany of sacrifice, vigilance, and courage, her shield against darkness eternal. The ruins of Carthun lay silent under a dim red sky, warped by the lingering corruption that pulsed beneath the city like a heartbeat of shadow. Sister Celestine Valeria stood alone on the observation deck of the eternal vigil, her armor reflecting the ghostly glow of distant stars. The battles had been won, yet each victory felt hollow, each act of courage shadowed by subtle betrayals within her own ranks. She had sensed it growing, the quiet ambition cloaked in loyalty, and now the signs had become impossible to ignore. Reports arrived faster than they could be processed. Outposts abandoned, reinforcements delayed, and minor skirmishes turning catastrophic because of subtle misalignments in strategy. Valeria's mind worked quickly, weighing the evidence, separating chance from intent. Her intuition screamed that the missteps were deliberate, acts of quiet sabotage intended to test the limits of her patience and the faith of the sisters under her command. She understood that the real battle was no longer only against the demonic entity below Carthun, but against the darkness festering in human hearts. The council assembled in the chamber, the air tense with unspoken suspicion. Sister Magdalen's eyes were grave. "The warp surges are escalating," she said. "The entity beneath Carthun is adapting, learning from our strategies, probing for weakness. And within our own ranks, hesitation, misaligned squads, and deliberate errors suggest that loyalty is not absolute. Vigilance is required on all fronts, both in battle and in trust." Her words, measured and precise, underscored the gravity of their situation. The cost of misjudgment could be the ruin of Carthun and the collapse of faith among the faithful. Sister Lucia remained calm, her words deliberate, her advice influencing strategy at every turn. Yet Valeria now recognized the pattern. Every suggestion carried a subtle direction, steering decisions in ways that could increase tension, test obedience, or manipulate outcomes. Loyalty was being weighed against ambition, and the shadow of betrayal threatened to unravel the cohesion Valeria had fought to maintain. Leadership demanded not only strategy and courage, but insight into hearts and minds, the ability to detect disloyalty even in silence. A sudden warp flare erupted beneath the city, violent and unpredictable, shaking the ruins and the fragile morale of the sisters. The entity had grown bolder, its presence intelligent and calculating, exploiting hesitation and observing patterns in both strategy and human behavior. Valeria's pulse quickened, not with fear but with the awareness that this confrontation was both external and internal. Each choice now carried dual consequences: the outcome of the battle itself and the revelation of loyalty or betrayal within her command. Strike teams deployed into the fractured streets, wards flaring against the warp corruption that twisted temples and collapsed structures alike. Every strike, every movement was precise, yet the subtle fractures among the squads persisted. Delays, slight deviations from orders, and misalignments that could no longer be dismissed as error. Valeria's suspicions solidified into certainty. Betrayal had become an active force, influencing outcomes, shaping decisions, and testing the boundaries of her authority. Hours passed in relentless combat. The entity moved with unnerving intelligence, exploiting the smallest hesitation, probing weaknesses in formation, and observing the loyalty of those who followed Valeria's command. Her wards flared, her blade ignited with holy flame. Yet even as she fought, her mind remained acutely aware of the subtle disruptions among her sisters. Each act of courage was tempered by doubt, each tactical success shadowed by the knowledge that internal betrayal could undo any victory. Leadership, she realized, was now a trial of perception, moral clarity, and endurance under impossible conditions. In a critical moment, Sister Lucia's squad faltered at a decisive juncture, withdrawing from a strategic position despite direct orders. Valeria's instincts flared. The act was deliberate, not open rebellion but subtle, patient manipulation. Every misstep, every hesitation, every act of misdirection was a thread in a web that threatened to unravel the cohesion of her forces. Valeria's gaze met Lucia's across the battlefield, a silent acknowledgement of betrayal, yet tempered by the understanding that premature confrontation could destroy the fragile unity still holding her sisters together. Timing, she knew, would be everything. The entity struck back with renewed intensity, its form a writhing mass of shadow and fire, exploiting fractures within the ranks. Wards flared and beams of holy light cut through darkness, yet the battle was no longer solely about physical victory. It had become a crucible of loyalty, a test of morality, and a measure of faith under pressure. Every command Valeria issued carried the dual weight of survival and discernment, for failure in either would result in catastrophe. At last, after hours of unrelenting engagement, the entity retreated into the rift, leaving the wards stable but the city scarred. The victory was incomplete. Subtle sabotage had compromised critical operations, endangering lives and resources, confirming Valeria's suspicions. Patience remained her ally, but judgment was approaching. Loyalty and betrayal had been revealed in action, yet confrontation required precision and timing. Too soon and cohesion might fracture entirely. She addressed her sisters in the council chamber afterward, her voice calm yet firm. "We have endured, yet the war is far from over. Corruption remains in the warp and in hearts. Trust must be proven through action, not words. Every decision, every act of faith, every sacrifice carries consequence. Be vigilant. The shadow of betrayal waits patiently, and the cost of faltering is immeasurable." Her gaze lingered on Sister Lucia, unspoken and deliberate, signaling the reckoning that would come, restrained only by strategy and the patience of a commander who understood the weight of timing. Alone on the observation deck, Valeria watched the faint pulse of the rift below, a reminder that corruption, both external and internal, was eternal. Whispers of forbidden power tugged at the edges of her consciousness, promises of influence and control. Yet the true threat remained the human heart, ambition cloaked in loyalty, hesitation masquerading as prudence, and betrayal patient as the stars themselves. Leadership demanded endurance, courage, and moral clarity, and Valeria bore the burden willingly. Every victory carried scars, every choice weighed heavily, and every act of faith was shadowed by the patient inevitability of treachery. And still she endured, the litany of vigilance and sacrifice her shield against the darkness that waited beyond comprehension. The air above Carthun was thick with warp-tainted haze, the horizon split by streaks of crimson lightning and the faint flicker of dying suns. Sister Celestine Valeria moved through the eternal vigil, her armor blackened by soot and etched with the marks of battle. Victory had become a fragile veneer. Beneath it lay the patient, insidious presence of betrayal and ambition. Every glance from her sisters now carried unspoken meaning, every word a test of loyalty. She had sensed it for days, the subtle fractures in trust, and now the moment of reckoning had arrived. The rift pulsed violently, the entity beneath stirring with intelligence and malice. Reports indicated that squads deployed to contain it had been sabotaged, supply lines disrupted, reinforcements delayed, tactical positions abandoned. Valeria's mind raced, calculating not only the strategic response but the timing of confrontation. Betrayal, she knew, could not be met with rash action. Precision was paramount, loyalty had to be tested, and ambition exposed before it could unravel everything she had fought to protect. Sister Lucia approached, her posture measured, her eyes betraying none of the tension that churned beneath her serene exterior. "The entity grows bolder," she said calmly. "We must strike decisively. Hesitation could be fatal." Her voice carried the weight of command, but beneath it lay a subtle undertone, a nudge, a test of perception. Valeria's instincts flared. This was the moment, the point at which loyalty would prove itself or betrayal would rise in triumph. Valeria convened the council in the war chamber. Her sisters gathered, each bearing the exhaustion of battle and the shadow of doubt. "The warp rift is expanding," she said, her voice steady but firm. "The entity tests us, probing our defenses, seeking weakness. But we are tested not only by the forces without, but by those within. Every act, every decision, every hesitation carries weight. The time for subtlety ends. Loyalty and treachery will be revealed in action, and every choice will bear consequence." Her gaze lingered on Lucia, sharp and unwavering, signaling that the reckoning was imminent. Strike teams were dispatched into the city's broken streets, wards blazing against the demonic corruption that surged from the rift. Each sister moved with practiced precision, yet the subtle disruptions remained. Minor errors in timing, slight misalignments in formation, and delayed reactions all pointed to deliberate manipulation. Valeria's judgment was clear. Betrayal had revealed itself not in words, but in the tangible consequences of inaction and misdirection. The moral and psychological stakes were as high as the tactical ones, for every misstep threatened the cohesion of her forces and the faith of the faithful. Hours of combat unfolded like a crucible. The entity, sensing the fractures within Valeria's command, struck with cunning, exploiting hesitation, probing for weakness and testing loyalty. Tendrils of warp energy twisted through collapsed buildings, seeking to disrupt formations and isolate squads. Valeria moved among her sisters, her blade ignited in holy flame, wards flaring to shield the faithful. Yet every victory was tinged with doubt, every advance shadowed by the knowledge that betrayal lurked close, patient and deliberate, capable of undermining even the most decisive action. In a critical confrontation, Sister Lucia's squad faltered at a decisive moment, leaving a crucial sector exposed. Valeria's instincts flared. This hesitation was deliberate, not open rebellion, but subtle, calculated disruption. Every misstep was a thread in a web of ambition, designed to weaken the integrity of the command structure. Valeria's eyes met Lucia's across the battlefield, and in that instant the truth was undeniable. The betrayal she had sensed had revealed itself not through words or confession, but through action. Leadership demanded precision, courage, and moral clarity in addressing it. The entity surged with renewed fury, exploiting the gap created by the faltering squad. Wards flared, blasts of holy energy tore through darkness, and the sisters fought with desperate precision. Yet even as they achieved partial victory, the shadow of betrayal weighed heavier than the demonic presence itself. Valeria understood that the battlefield was no longer merely a test of strength or strategy. It was a trial of moral judgment, loyalty, and the ability to confront ambition without destroying cohesion. Every choice carried irrevocable consequence. At the height of the conflict, Valeria acted decisively. She ordered a recalibration of squads, personally guiding those loyal into fortified positions while isolating those whose actions had proven deliberate disruption. Her voice cut through the chaos, firm and unwavering. Loyalty is proven through action. Betrayal is revealed in deeds. We endure not for ourselves, but for Carthun, for the Imperium, and for the faith we serve. Those who falter under scrutiny will answer for their actions. The words were both judgment and challenge, a call for fidelity tempered with the necessity of strategic timing. As the entity finally withdrew into the rift, leaving the wards stable yet the city scarred, Valeria's attention turned fully to the internal struggle. Subtle sabotage had endangered lives and compromised strategic positions. Betrayal had asserted itself in ways that could no longer be ignored. Patience remained her ally, but judgment was imminent. Loyalty and ambition had been revealed through action, and the reckoning would come with deliberate precision. The sisters' faith and resolve would be tested as fiercely as any external threat. In the council chamber afterward, Valeria addressed her sisters, her tone calm but unyielding. "We have survived. Yet the war is far from over. Corruption remains in the warp and in hearts. Trust must be proven through action, not words. Every decision, every act of faith, every sacrifice carries consequence. Be vigilant, for betrayal waits patiently, and the cost of faltering is greater than any foe we face on the battlefield." Her gaze lingered on Sister Lucia, silent and deliberate, signaling the confrontation yet restrained by timing, judgment, and strategy. Alone on the observation deck, Valeria gazed at the faint glow of the rift below. Whispers of forbidden power tugged at the edges of her consciousness, promises of control and influence, yet the true threat was human, ambition cloaked in loyalty, hesitation masquerading as prudence, and betrayal patient as the stars themselves. Leadership demanded endurance, courage, and moral clarity. Every victory bore scars, every choice carried weight, and every act of faith was shadowed by the inevitability of judgment. And still she endured, the litany of vigilance and sacrifice her shield against darkness eternal. The sky above Carthun burned with unnatural fire, crimson and green streaks twisting like living veins across the heavens. Sister Celestine Valeria stood atop the observation platform of the eternal vigil, the echo of distant warp storms vibrating through her bones. Today was the reckoning. The betrayals she had sensed, the subtle fractures in loyalty that had grown like rot among her sisters, would finally be confronted. The entity below stirred with anticipation, feeding on doubt and hesitation, sensing the fracture in unity that now threatened to unmake them. Reports from the front lines confirmed her suspicions. Key positions had been abandoned, squads delayed or misdirected, and strategic advantages squandered. The subtle acts of treachery that had been building for weeks had crystallized into undeniable action. Sister Lucia's influence, calm and deliberate in council, had now manifested in operational sabotage. Valeria's gaze hardened. Patience had been her ally, but judgment could wait no longer. Leadership demanded courage, clarity, and swift, decisive action. The council convened in the war chamber, tension so thick it could be cut with a blade. The rift beneath Carthun grows unstable, Sister Magdalene warned, her voice taut with urgency. The entity senses weakness and will strike decisively. But our greater threat is not only in the warp, it is within. Actions, not words, reveal loyalty. Hesitation costs lives. Valeria listened, measuring each word, aware that every sister in the room carried both exhaustion and doubt, that ambition could twist even the faithful under pressure. Valeria's voice, calm yet imbued with the weight of authority, cut through the tension. The time for subtlety ends. Betrayal has revealed itself through deeds, and loyalty will be tested by action. We strike now, not only at the rift, but at the divisions within our ranks. Every sister who falters, who allows ambition to outweigh duty, will face judgment. Every decision must be decisive, for hesitation invites death. Her gaze swept the council, landing on Sister Lucia. Silence stretched between them, heavy and deliberate, a tension that neither required words to convey. Strike teams deployed immediately, moving into the ruins of the city with wards blazing and weapons ignited. Each sister carried not only the burden of battle, but the knowledge that loyalty and betrayal were being measured in every action. Minor errors, delays, or hesitation would no longer be overlooked. Valeria's mind was a storm of strategy and discernment, calculating every movement, every position, every consequence. The external battle mirrored the internal reckoning, each decision a test of courage, judgment, and faith. The entity below sensed the shift, surging with renewed vigor. Tendrils of warp energy whipped through collapsed streets, seeking to exploit hesitation, misaligned formations, and fractured squads. Valeria moved among her sisters, cutting through corruption with holy flame, guiding, protecting, and correcting. Yet even as she fought, she maintained a vigilant eye on internal fractures. Betrayal was no longer subtle. It had manifested in action, and the reckoning was now unavoidable. Sister Lucia faltered again at a critical juncture, leaving a key flank exposed. Valeria's instincts flared. The act was deliberate. Not rebellion born of fury, but calculated manipulation designed to test limits, gauge patience, and sow doubt. The battlefield became a crucible of both strategy and moral judgment, and Valeria understood that swift, precise action was required. Hesitation could not be afforded. The survival of Carthun, the integrity of her sisters, and the faith they served depended on it. With unwavering resolve, Valeria confronted the betrayal directly. She ordered squads loyal to her forward into positions of strength, isolating those whose actions had proven deliberate disruption. Her voice, both command and judgment, rang across the battlefield. Loyalty is proven through action. Ambition that betrays duty has no place among the faithful. The test is upon us, and judgment is inescapable. We endure, we prevail, and we protect the Imperium, but we do so together or not at all. The words struck like a blade, cutting through hesitation and doubt, binding the faithful while exposing the disloyal. The entity sensed the shift in cohesion and struck with unprecedented ferocity, surging through weakened wards and exposed sectors. Wards flared, beams of holy light ignited in defense, and the sisters fought with desperate precision. Every strike carried both the weight of survival and the consequence of judgment. Loyalty, now tested in action, proved itself in courage and sacrifice, while betrayal revealed its cost in hesitation and misalignment. The battlefield became a reflection of hearts and minds, a mirror of faith and moral clarity under pressure. Hours passed, the battle reaching its zenith. The entity was finally subdued, retreating into the depths of the rift, leaving Carthun scarred but stable. Valeria surveyed the aftermath. The loyal had proven themselves through action, the ambitious exposed and restrained, and the rift contained for now. Yet the cost had been steep, lives lost, squads fractured, and the weight of moral judgment heavy upon her shoulders. Every victory bore the scars of internal strife, and every decision left a mark upon the soul of leadership. In the council chamber afterward, Valeria addressed her sisters, her voice calm but resolute. "We have faced both corruption and betrayal and survived. Faith has been tested, loyalty proven, and ambition revealed. Yet the war is not over, and the vigilance required remains eternal. Remember this: the cost of faltering is greater than any enemy we face on the battlefield. We endure not for glory, but for Carthun, the Imperium, and the faith we serve. Let this reckoning temper our actions, guide our loyalty, and strengthen our resolve." Alone on the observation deck, Valeria gazed at the faintly glowing rift below, the whispers of forbidden power still tugging at the edges of her mind. The true threat had never been only the entity beneath Carthun, nor the warp itself. It had been human hearts, patient and calculating, ambition cloaked in loyalty, hesitation masquerading as prudence. Leadership demanded endurance, courage, and moral clarity. Every victory bore scars, every choice carried weight, and every act of faith was shadowed by the inevitable presence of judgment. And still she endured, the litany of vigilance and sacrifice her shield against darkness eternal. Carthun's skies were empty now, save for the faint glow of distant stars and the dying embers of the warp rift. The city lay in silence, scarred and hollowed by the battles that had raged for days. Sister Celestine Valeria walked among the ruins, her armor scorched and etched with the marks of sacrifice. The wards that had once pulsed with holy light now dimmed, leaving only a fragile sense of order in a city that had nearly been lost to corruption and treachery. Victory had been achieved, but at a cost that weighed heavily upon her heart. The council chamber was quiet. Survivors tended to the wounded, repaired wards, and documented losses, but beneath the routine there was a palpable absence. Sisters who would not return, squads broken, and the echo of betrayal that had scarred even the faithful. Valeria's mind reflected upon the choices that had shaped these days, the precise timing of confrontation, the isolation of the ambitious, the courage of the loyal, and the subtle threads of deception that had threatened to unravel everything. Leadership had demanded clarity, endurance, and sacrifice, yet even now, the weight of responsibility pressed upon her like a physical burden. Sister Lucia, restrained and weary, approached Valeria quietly. No words were spoken. The history of betrayal and testing had created a silence more potent than any dialogue. Valeria's gaze met hers, and in that moment the consequences of ambition and treachery were fully realized. Loyalty had been preserved, yet the cost of vigilance, judgment, and moral discernment had left scars not easily healed. Valeria understood that the trials had been necessary, but the echoes of betrayal would linger, a reminder that even the faithful could falter under pressure. The surviving squads emerged from the ruins, their movements precise, their faces marked with exhaustion and sorrow. Each sister carried the weight of their actions, whether of courage or hesitation. Valeria's heart recognized the sacrifices, the courage that had saved lives, and the discipline that had preserved Carthun from the abyss. And yet, for every life saved, a cost had been exacted. Immortality, or the semblance of it, demanded witness to endless cycles of loss, betrayal, and struggle. She wondered whether such endurance was blessing or curse, whether the span of centuries offered insight or only magnified the grief of watching empires, cities, and comrades fall. Reports indicated that the warp rift, though subdued, remained unstable. The entity had retreated, but its presence lingered like a shadow over the city. Valeria's wards flickered in the dim light as she considered the path forward. The war had been won, but the war against ambition, doubt, and corruption was eternal. Vigilance was required not only for the city, but within her ranks, within her sisters, and within herself. Every choice carried consequence, every act of faith weighed upon her conscience, and every victory bore the shadow of sacrifice. She walked to the observation deck, gazing at the faint pulse of the rift below. The whispers of forbidden power, subtle and insistent, had not been silenced. They promised influence, control, and the avoidance of loss, yet Valeria understood their cost. The true danger had never been only the entity beneath Carthun or the demonic corruption itself. It had been ambition cloaked in loyalty, hesitation masquerading as prudence, and the quiet, patient presence of betrayal. Leadership demanded moral clarity as much as courage, and in that clarity she found both solace and sorrow. Alone, Valeria reflected upon the lives lost, the decisions made, and the fragile thread by which victory had been held. The scars of betrayal, though addressed and mitigated, would linger. Some sisters had faltered, others had excelled, and all bore witness to the consequences of choices made in fire and shadow. Immortality, she realized, was not the preservation of life alone. It was the endurance of loss, the weight of consequence, and the responsibility of guiding the faithful through cycles of victory and grief. The city below, though scarred, began to breathe again. Repairs were underway, and the wards that had faltered under strain flickered back to life. Yet Carthun was no longer the same. The shadow of betrayal, the memory of near collapse, and the toll of relentless vigilance had left marks that would endure across centuries. Valeria knew that the litany of sacrifice and perseverance would continue, that every choice, every act of loyalty, every confrontation with ambition would shape the city and its defenders. The end of battle did not signify peace, only the persistence of vigilance and responsibility. Sister Celestine Valeria lowered her blade, the fire of holy light dimming to a steady glow. She spoke softly, a litany of reflection and resolve, both for herself and for the sisters who remained. We endure not for glory, not for recognition, but for Carthun, for the Imperium, and for the faith we serve. Every choice carries weight, every act of courage is shadowed by loss, and every victory is tempered by the price paid. We are faithful, we are vigilant, and we bear the burden of consequence with clarity and resolve. Let this be our shield against the darkness eternal. The rift's faint glow pulsed once more, then receded into the depths, leaving Carthun under the fragile light of distant stars. Valeria gazed at it with solemn understanding. The entity had been contained, betrayal had been confronted, and the faithful had endured. Yet the cost had been steep, the losses profound, and the echoes of ambition and corruption would remain, a reminder that vigilance was eternal. She knew the litany would continue, that immortality was both blessing and curse, and that the weight of leadership carried consequences far beyond the battlefield. As the sun, fading, dying, eternal, crept over the horizon, Valeria turned from the observation deck. The city, scarred but enduring, awaited reconstruction, healing, and renewed vigilance. She walked among her sisters, each step a testament to sacrifice, courage, and moral clarity. In the shadow of loss, in the echo of betrayal, and in the endurance of faith, Carthun survived. And though the battle had ended, the war against ambition, corruption, and the inevitable cost of immortality would continue, carried in the hearts and actions of those who remained vigilant and true.